Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're joining us from. We have a large crowd today, and I hope you'll be enjoying today. Today, we're going to do the cart before the horse. The pun is intended. Understanding access to federal assistance for natural resource conservation and working lands webinar series. And this webinar is going to be the first of three in a series. And today it's going to be basically an introduction to CART, the Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool. And it's to give farmers and ranchers the basic understanding and familiarity with CART, including how CART can be used to evaluate their operations for conservation assistance and funding consideration, and how they can request an assessment. First of all, I just give a background on us. We're the National Center for Appropriate Technology. I'm based in our Butte office in Montana. We have offices you can see all over the country. We've been in existence for 44 years. I calculated this morning. And we've been active in a lot of different areas, but principally rural development, rural energy, and sustainable agriculture. And we've been around for a while. And we're also known, we're associated with the ATTRA program, which is a sustainable agricultural program that is funded through the Farm Bill and the USDA. We do this program, and we have done so for 33 years, under a cooperative agreement with the USDA. And we've been around, and for many years, we've got a great website, great information. We answer questions of farmers and ranchers every single day, 5 days a week. You can contact us through any medium that you want to these days. We used to have the old 1-800 number, and which is still used. We have email, of course, and chat and all the other different ways to contact us. And we welcome all your questions about anything to do with sustainable agriculture. That's what we're in business for. And I also want to mention that we want to very thankful to have the NRCS with us today. And I looked up there, and they've got us all beat. I think they've been in operation for 87 years, since 1933. So they've got us all, both our ATTRA and our NCAT program beat. And they've been an institution in USDA since the Dust Bowl, and have been working to support conservation throughout this country. And our speaker today, we're very lucky to have Aaron Loster. Aaron is the chief of the planning branch for the U.S. Department of USDA NRCS. And since we're talking about CART, we've got the person who has been intimately involved in the creation and operation and continuing improvement of CART, as we'll see today. And he's done many, many things in his life. So, as you all will see, and should see, there will be questions in, actually that should be the question box, not the check box. This is a webinar. And that's the way you're going to get questions to us. I will be tracking questions through the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. If we don't get them all answered during the session today, they will be documented, particularly if you write them in that question box, and I will get back to you with an answer. That's what we love to do. So if you don't get your answer directly answered today, during the thing, you'll get one subsequent to it. Also, we will do a survey after the entire presentation, and all the Q&A it'll just come automatically to your email, and we'd like you to fill that out if possible, because it really helps us to improve these webinars as we do many more of them in the future. And I went too far, so I'm gonna go back. And now we're gonna give over power to Aaron, and Aaron's gonna start the talk.
Thank you, Jeff. A little bit about myself. I've lived all over the country growing up, but every summer we went back to my grandfather's farm in southern Indiana. And one of the days I was finally old enough to go out and bale hay with him. And so I came down, of course, southern Indiana summer, it's hot, it's humid. I came down in shorts and a t-shirt, which for those of you who bale hay knew this wasn't going to go well. So my grandfather was a man of few words, and he told me I needed to go put long pants and a long shirt on. And I said, no, it's too hot. And so he said, okay, fine, but you're going to be out there till noon. So those who have baled hay will know I was cut to shreds by the end of by the time for lunch. So what I learned from this though is, sometimes I don't know all the answers, and I'm going to talk to you today about CART and to give you a lot of information about the conservation planning program for NRCS. But keep in mind that I don't know all the answers, but I'll try to find them out if I can. So let's jump right into CART here. So what is CART? It's one of the NRCS tools, and for those who have not been familiar with NRCS, NRCS's mission is really to support America's farmers and ranchers and forest landowners. We also help people make investments in their operation and local community. Big goal is to keep our working lands working, boost rural economies, and increase the competitiveness of agriculture. We want to do all this while we're improving the quality of our soil, water, air, and plants. We do focus on that direct one-to-one advice. So we want to come out to your farm with you. Obviously, this whole COVID situation makes that a little more complex, but we want to help you be able to access all these federal opportunities that we have out there. And we are a non-regulatory agency. So with that, what is CART itself? CART is our conservation assessment and ranking tool. It's used by our staff. So I know folks will ask me for the web link or whatnot. If you're not an NRCS staff at the moment, you won't be able to directly access CART. But what it does is it helps them complete an inventory of your land to help identify where there are resource concerns that you have or that the systems might identify that we can help you with. And it helps us then take that and prioritize that for us to then move on to help you select conservation practices. NRCS is built around helping implement conservation practices all the way back to when we were founded to deal with issues with the Dust Bowl. So that's really what our core is to drive through, is how can we help you implement those practices to help out soil, air, water, and plants. To do that, of course, you need assistance. So what the tool also does, the second part, the ranking part of the tool, is it's going to look for different funding opportunities that are out there and how we can, your operation can be best suited for those different funding opportunities. And we have more than 20 different programs out there. So, there's almost always going to be some way that we can help. We just got to find that right fit. Hopefully CART will help you do that. So when we created CART, it's a brand new thing. We just rolled it out in January of last year. Our goals were, one, to streamline the delivery. And a big part of that is, we have a lot of application processes historically. Again, we have 20 different programs, over 20 actually, and then we have a lot of different contracting with that. So you might get assistance in 4 or 5 different programs, and so that can be a lot of paperwork. Can we bring that, streamline it down into one system within CART? That's our ultimate goal. We didn't quite get there this year. I think we have down to 2 or 3 applications, but we made significant progress of bringing those down, and we want to do that even farther. The other part is having a centralized system for our assistants. It helps us be more efficient. It helps us capture the information one time and not have to repeat it. In previous tools that we've had to re-enter things every time we're out talking to you into a new tool to be evaluated. The same way with entering the information about your crop rotation or other systems, we had to enter it one time for soils, one time for water quality, one time for air quality. And so we did a lot of duplication. With the centralized system, we can capture that information and only do it one time. We want to simplify the planning process as well. Once we capture that information, can we move it forward and use that planning information to help us answer other questions about which program is right for you, which helps us with the program delivery and making it more seamless behind the scenes from the administrative side, so that we can spend more time with you out on your farm, walking your fields, talking about what are the right solutions for you, which gets us to that reducing that time. Again, reducing duplication has been our overall concern in here, and hopefully you'll see that throughout. So it all starts with conservation planning, and Hugh Hammond Bennett was our founder 87 years ago. who really focused on, how do we develop that basic conservation planning of being on the farm with the farmer, understanding their operation and the needs of that land. And so that's what we're going to try to do, and CART will help us do a better job. So we have a conservation planning process. If you're familiar with NRCS, you know it's a 9-step process, but it really falls down into 3 major phases, and you can see them here. Collecting and analyzing your site helps us understand it. We can look at what are your needs. Decision support. There is more than one way for us to address almost every problem out there. Which is going to be the way that best meets your needs as a farmer? And then 3 is, how do we get it implemented? That's going to be our design requirements, assistance with surveying, that type of information. And then we want to evaluate it at the end. Did we achieve your goal on that operation? We have a lot of different systems that help us do that. One of them is Conservation Desktop, and that's our geospatial tool. So if you're working with NRCS and you're getting maps from us, or you're working with one of our conservation partners, they're going to be designing those maps within that Conservation Desktop system. What CART does is it sits on top of that desktop and uses that mapping information to do this evaluation and do this assessment and do the ranking on top of that geospatial. And it uses that same information to start feeding information into our environmental assessment that we do as part of our federal actions. So how does CART do that? Well, it's going to start in that phase 1 of the planning process, in the collecting and analyzing. So you can see a map there in the background that our Conservation Desktop creates. What it's going to do then is go through all these geospatial layers that are out there to look for soils. What are your erosion rates out there? Where's the vulnerability for water quality leaching and nutrient leaching? Are there wildlife opportunities on your operation, or there's other special resource concerns? What this is going to do is going to help our planners understand at a basic level your operation before they even step foot out there, so they can then help you address anything that they might see in some of these background layers. But it also gives us information to start analyzing within the system. So once they've done that base analysis, they're going to talk to you about what the resource concerns are out there. And when we say resource concerns for NRCS, and we have 47 of them total, we're really looking at what are the problems out there. Is it water quality? Are you trying to improve your soil health? Are you dealing with an air quality issue in California? Are you dealing with a wildlife issue that you either want to attract more wildlife, or you have a threatened endangered species that we need to manage around? Any of those different issues, those are what we call our resource concerns. And so they fit in broad categories of soil, water, air, plants, and animals. But we break them down to a number of different criteria. And our planners, when they meet with you, will talk to you about what are those problems. A specific one down the lower left-hand side, and the text gets small, so I'm not expecting you to be tested on it at the end here, but is classic gully erosion. So if you have a gully out in your field, we're going to note that when we do the assessment out there. So there's a set of questions within CART that help our planners go through those resource concerns once you identify them. So if you say you have a water quality problem, it's going to ask a couple of questions about your operation related to water quality. So we're not going to ask the whole range of questions every time. The tool itself contracts and expands based on what do you identify as those resource concerns that are out there. So the next part of that is it's going to take that information and now it's going to start analyzing it. We have our planning criteria. So an example of that might be erosion. Most folks know that we plan for erosion at a level called T, which is the tolerable soil loss. So it's going to look at that planning criteria. How are you doing compared to that planning criteria on that site? It's going to do that by looking at your existing conditions and what practices you may already be doing out there. And then we're going to look at what are the new practices we're going to do. What the tool does is it translates that planning criteria into what we call thresholds, which are a numeric-based target that we use that geospatial analysis to help us see where you're at. So if you're on a steep slope, you need more conservation to address erosion than on a flat slope. But if you've got a ponding issue, obviously flat slopes are going to be much harder to address, and you'll need that more than some sort of steep slope situation. So the threshold itself will change based on your existing site conditions. And that's what the tool pulls up that base information and helps our planners use that to do a better analysis. So this is some of the information that then will feed out to the planner. And what it is that blue vertical line there is that threshold line that I talked about. So that's our planning criteria. Now, obviously, all of these different resource concerns aren't going to have the same number out there, especially as I talked about slopes affecting it and climate and other things. But we do normalize it for a visual as a quick way for us to tell, are you meeting the planning criteria, or do you have more opportunities to move forward there? So I know the colors sometimes change on the PowerPoint, so I'm going to say it's brown on mine, but the first one there is that existing condition. And so that's going to be based on those questions that, the planner may ask you, or they may see while they're out there. Do you already have cover on there? What kind of crops are you growing? That type of condition. Then we have our existing practices. I know a lot of you have probably worked with NRCS or worked with the conservation district or other entity in the past to implement conservation, or you may have done it on your own. And so we can capture that into the system. So when you add those two things up, and each of them has points behind it, you're going to get how you're doing compared to that planning criteria. So you can see in this case, the air quality one, they've met the planning criteria, but soil erosion, soil quality, they're a little shy of meeting the planning criteria. So that's certainly an opportunity. Now, all of our programs are voluntary. As I said, we're not regulatory. So you're not required to bring these up to that planning criteria. We have certain programs that might need you to do one thing or another. For example, our CSP program requires you to meet at least 2 of the planning criteria. But you can come in with not meeting any of them and sign up for EQIP. So we have a variety of programs that can help. So just because you may be shy of meeting a planning criteria, that just means it's an opportunity and something to look at, but doesn't mean that we have to address it in our first go round. So taking that analysis information, we're now going to look at what we call that phase 2 decision of support. And that's where we're going to look at what are the alternative practices. Is there a different system? If we change your rotation, if we change your tillage, if we add buffers, cover crops, all kinds of different things. So we're going to look at that. We have both primary and supporting practices that can assist with that. And then those garner additional conservation points towards meeting that threshold. Now, we do recognize that no matter how great of a tool we think we have out here, or whether we think we should wear shorts and a t-shirt out to bale hay, sometimes we're not right. And there might be a local issue, and maybe the tool doesn't represent your part of the country well. So we do have the ability to override the CART results. And when that happens, the planner is going to go in and say, well, something just doesn't add up here, and they're going to document that, why they're overriding the CART results. That may be because there's another tool, maybe a local tool that you use in Iowa that may be more exact than the national tools that are built into CART. It may be that you're on the side of a mountain in Hawaii and we really don't model volcanic soils well. It could be lots of different things. So we do allow that override. So just because you get an initial result doesn't mean that is 100% the actual one. What we're seeing this year in our overrides, we're seeing about 1 to 1.5% of them do get overridden. So we think that's a pretty good rate. But we do understand that again, nothing's perfect, and we make sure that we have an opportunity, because those local conditions and what our field staff are seeing is obviously what you're experiencing on your farm. So after we've looked at those alternatives, those other practices, we look at cover crops. So let's say on this site, we went to no-till and cover crops that they weren't doing before. Well, that's going to have benefits not only for soil erosion, which may be what they originally came in for, but it will have soil quality, water quality, habitat benefits, and even additional air quality benefits. So again, you see in this case, they did hit or exceed all the thresholds. They wouldn't have had to, but with those 2 practices, they would have in this case. And they exceeded that air quality. So that information now helps us understand, how good of a job we did planning, can help you understand what benefits you should start to see, and helps us look at the different programs that are going to help you implement that. So once you've done that, they've worked with you on what your plan is. Again, we need to look at those alternatives. Again, there may be a different set of practices that would have done as well and met your local needs better based on your labor or your cost. And so we can look at all those alternatives before we go to finalizing your plan. So once we've found the right choices for you, then we would work on finalizing your plan in our conservation desktop, which will then kick out that plan document for you. And once you've signed that and agreed to that, that's when we want to get those implementation requirements. But we want to make sure that we've worked with you to make sure that we're meeting your needs out there. So that's phase 1 of CART, the assessment part. We're going to move on to ranking, but I did want to open it up see if there are any questions at this point. So
Thank
I'll
you,
turn it
Aaron.
to you, Jeff.
Yep. Can you hear me, everyone? Yep. Okay. Yeah, we have a few. And I just want to remind folks, some people have been asking, this will be recorded and it'll be available after, so you can, if you have others who want to see it or you can't make the whole thing, there's another opportunity to access this. This is recorded. The first one I have, and it's probably seems a bit of an insider, will CART replace the practice physical effects Excel sheets that evaluate practices in relation to resource concerns? And I'm
Yeah,
hoping
that's
you know what that is.
I do. So what we call that is the CPPE. So CART has a set of points which we call CAP, C-A-P-P, and ultimately they will replace the CPPE information. One of the things I'll talk about when we go what's in the future for CART is getting down to a sub level from practices. We know some practices can be implemented in a fairly broad way, like conservation cover crops. There's a lot of different options for cover crops, and they have different environmental benefits based on when you plant them, what species you plant, and such, when you harvest. So we wanted to refine our environmental assessment based on some of those levels of details. And so what CART has is that ability to let us do that. The older CPPE system is sort of limited in that way. So ultimately, we will be replacing it. It's a transition process. Back to you, Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had to unmute. Will CART work for hobby type farms, say a 15-acre with hay, pasture, and wetland?
Right, great question. So within CART, it is scalable. So we can go down to as little as you can make a box on a map. Now the analysis gets harder as you get less than an acre, just because the soils, depending on what your soils are. But yes, it will scale all the way from that up to, we have tens of thousands of acres in some of the plans. It really looks at what that, sometimes those smaller operations are more complex. And so they can sometimes take as much time as a big operation that may be more uniform in implementation. But CART will address that type of operation as well.
It says you suggested that NRCS planners have the ability to override CART results. And there's two kind of related questions. On what basis can they do this? And if they do, wouldn't that create a bias in the ranking? And basically, I think this is an NRCS employee said that they really aren't, they really have to get approval to override, and that it's not just just something that they can do by themselves.
Right. So there's sort of a couple of questions obviously mixed in together there, and good questions all. And so as the NRCS employee said, it's not something that is just a whim to override those results. We do have within the tool itself, there's a place where they have to document why they're overriding. Normally that's by referencing another tool or something else that's explaining why they're overriding. But and sometimes they need approval from being reviewed by another person to make sure they're doing that appropriately. So it's not a whim thing, which carries it into the ranking discussion. One, we don't overrides shouldn't bias because they do have a review and quality assurance process. But when we talk about the points, it gets a little more complex. So what we don't allow them to do right now is override the score in CART for ranking purposes. Now, for planning purposes, and I'll talk about a little bit more in the ranking portion. For planning purposes, they can override that it does or it does not meet our planning criteria, and that may or may not make you eligible for CSP. But for the ranking, normally there is a set criteria, like you are within or you're without a certain area, or you are or you're not implementing a practice. And so those things normally can't be overridden. So the override doesn't have the same effect in those areas. The one spot that it could have an effect, and this is one of those that we're looking to improve, is if the the soils maps are just wrong for that location, and that's one that even if we were currently using our older system, would still be, we just use one uniform system. It's the soil map, and that it determines your rank on that. So so if your soils map is wrong, you wouldn't change your points, and it could actually be a different soils type. But if there's a question in the ranking that refers to the soils, it will pick up that information. So that's, I guess, a convoluted way of saying it depends, but we do have a quality assurance process to make sure that it only is happening inappropriately, and it has very limited potential to affect the ranking.
Yeah, and maybe we can get back to that when we get into the ranking. Here's another one that I think is a bit, and people wanted us to speak out acronyms. I know that's a very tricky thing with NRCS. I've worked with you guys a long time, and acronyms become very quickly, but the Environmental Quality Incentive Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program, that's CSP and EQIP. That was one people wanted to reiterate, just so they know that those are two major working lands. But now here's another one. Will you talk about, and here's an acronym, RMS level planning as opposed to progressive planning, and how this fits into the selection of resource concern ranking between producers. Now, maybe this is, well, we should wait to the ranking, but that's what they asked.
Sure. So it's a good question. So for the lay folks here, the RMS level planning would be basically that you've addressed all the resource concerns on an operation. And you may do that on a field, you may do that on the whole operation, so there could be different levels. But in CART terms, that would mean that you've assessed all the resource concerns. We don't require RMS level planning. We do more progressive planning where we start where you're ready to go as a producer, and so that may be one resource concern on one field. It may be a couple of resource concerns on lots of different fields, and then we want to build towards that RMS level because we want to help you address all your needs. But we don't require that for any of our programs. It's a aspirational goal to move forward. Now, if you are addressing more resource concerns, certain programs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in ranking, do look for that as part of their weighting in their ranking process. So yes, the Conservation Stewardship Program, that CSP, does look for higher levels of conservation, and if you've addressed more resource concerns, you're likely to do better in that program. Whereas EQIP is looking for, really getting the most environmental change, bang for your buck, and sometimes that means, the folks that are farther away from the environment are going to weight higher because there's a bigger resource concern problem there. So it really varies by program on how the number of resource concerns that you address, how that program looks at it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that and how we set the programs up here in a second.
Okay, one last one, and then we should move on, and I'll try to get to the others. You suggested that stewardship thresholds are, quote, set by geospatial analysis when available. I think we know what is used instead of geospatial analysis to set stewardship thresholds if you don't have that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So certain things, like I said, that vary by slope and rainfall and factors like that, soil type, are easy to set by geospatial analysis. There are some of our resource concerns that are almost simplistic when you look at them. For example, I gave the example of the classical gully erosion. Pretty much our planning standard is either you have one or you don't have one that's actively eroding. So it's pretty much a yes/no question. So in those kind of cases, we just set the threshold at 50, which is our sort of middle point of yes/no, and we move on. So some of them just have a base threshold that either you've achieved it or you've not. Another one that is a slight variance in between the two would be stream bank erosion. We have an assessment process in the questions that lead you toward the differences in how the site looks. So the threshold is actually 50, which means that you have a stable bank. But the assessment questions are going to ask you, is it heavily eroding, slightly eroding, moderately, or highly eroding. And so then it's going to vary around that score of 50 on how well you're doing. But we don't have the technology yet to really have that LiDAR bank information on all the sites out there. So we've used that surrogate of the question combination with the threshold base score to create that combination between the two to really achieve that threshold. Those are things that we are working on, those that we have more information on versus that we have less. We definitely are working with a number of universities on opportunities to do a better job in those assessments, and those are things that we look to improve over time. One of the big helpful things in CART for us is it's much more configurable than we're usually able to do. So we can change out an assessment method behind the scenes, not during a fiscal year because we try to keep everybody the same for ranking, but we can add a new method to evaluate something next year if we've learned of a better way to do that without having to go through a whole new reprogramming process within the tool. So it is definitely one of the issues that the CART is more of a framework for us to build on and get better as we move forward.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. You can continue. There's some more coming in. And remember, you need to write them in the question box because that's the only way we'll be taking questions. So feel free to keep, as you get them, write them in. Take it away, Aaron.
Great. So when I talk about ranking, ranking is all about not so much, we sometimes get really tied up in coming up with a score and does 100 mean something or 1,000 mean something, but ranking is really a prioritization process. Congress gives us X dollars, but we normally have 2 or 3 times X of requests. So, if Congress gave us enough money, we would fund everyone, but they don't. So we have to come up with a way to how do we determine who's going to get the funding. So it's really more of a question of that than it is it's not like you go to a test in school and if you get a 90%, you automatically pass. We have limited resources. And so when we look at the ranking, that's really what we're trying to get to is how do we make sure that we are following Congress's mandate to fund that. And so that varies by different programs. But the one thing that doesn't is what we're going to do on the ground. So within CART, what we're trying to do is create a one plan that we know that you may want to do these 5 different things that address 7 or 8 different resource concerns, whatever combination it might be. And there's a lot of different funding opportunities. Now, we know our employees work hard, and we know there are a lot of opportunities out there, but sometimes our employees are going to advise you on those things that they're familiar with, they know how to do. And if it's a program that maybe they're not as familiar with, they don't think about it. Or there may be a district employee or district program that they don't know about. So what CART does, it's going to take all your information, it's going to run it against all of the opportunities that are out there and look for matches. And it'll serve that up to our planners. So they don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot about that new opportunity that just came out last month. It's going to provide those for you. It's also going to look for, you may be able to do these 3 things under this program, but you can't do these 2 other things. At one point in the past, we made you choose that you could only pick one of the programs, and yes, it may not do your other 2 things, but sorry, you can't apply for both. What CART is going to allow you to do is it allows you to mix and match different programs to help fund your whole plan. And so, we are still sometimes developing multiple plans as we move towards this, but our real goal is to get to one plan so that then you can just look for all these different opportunities that are out there. Of course, the system will make sure we're not funding twice for the same thing through different programs. And so, we all would want that as taxpayers. So, for example of that is finding that right program. So in this example, which is too small for me to read, but you can see we're trying to do a couple of different practices out there. And there are a lot of different programs that can fund things like cover crop. So you look at this one, there's a general EQIP program, which is really eligible for anything in Minnesota. We have a watershed program, and this is our National Water Quality Program that is only in certain watersheds. Now, does this site fall in the right watershed or not? It takes our planners some time to sometimes know that. In this case, the whole county does, but if you were in the county next door in that lower right-hand corner, are you eligible or not? Well, it's going to depend on exactly where the site falls. What CART does is it can use its geospatial capabilities to tell you, okay, you are within that watershed, you are eligible for this additional program. There also might be a county program, and so you see that here with the county green box program. So any one of these 3 different programs could fund this contract. And so, as I said before, you used to have to pick which one did you want to go for. Well, you probably don't know anything about the ranking or your chances within these 3 different programs. So what CART does is you don't have to. It's going to make a choice, and it's going to have you apply for all of them, and then whichever one can fund you first will be the one that will fund you. So how does these funding things work? So we have all these different counties, we have all these different programs, and they all have different mandates. And most of these have a broad mandate set by Congress. We have the CSP program, that Conservation Security Program, that wants to fund a certain type of applications that are at the higher end of their existing quality, environmental quality, that planning level. And then we have like the EQIP program, which wants to make the biggest changes that it can in funding, improvements. And then we have all these other programs that are out there that have all different requirements. Some of them, we have easement programs within CART 2. There may be an easement option. Then we have CRP programs. So there's a whole Conservation Reserve program. Sorry, I'll try to stop using acronyms. So there's a whole bunch of different programs. So what we've done is we've taken all of those and looked at what are the things that they're driving at to prioritize who gets funded. Part of that is we look at what we call existing vulnerability. This goes back to those threshold scores and that existing condition. Is this site, got a long way to go? High slopes, moldboard plowing, lots of erosion, that's going to be a high vulnerability. If we can make a difference in water quality or erosion, that's the sites we want to find and get them fixed. So if you have a program that wants to look at that, you would want to maximize the points that come out of looking for those high vulnerability sites. We have certain programs like EQIP that want to maximize the practice effects. So can they get as much environmental bang for the buck? So that's going to use the practice information that we set up in your plan. So both of those in red there are things that are coming out of your plan. You don't need, and our planners don't need, to re-enter that information. In our system last year, you did. They had to go through and reassess for all of these different things that we should have already captured in the planning process. And now that information just comes forward and helps you find the right ranking pool and the right program for you. Now, we do know some things don't come up in our planning process that might be prioritized by a program. For example, we have a sage grouse program. So we assess your site for wildlife, but it's not necessarily sage grouse specific yet. We are working on that as a future improvement, but it doesn't tell you specific species. So the ranking pool will ask what we call resource questions, and that would be things like, does this plan improve the habitat for sage grouse? Or it could be, are you within a priority watershed? So we can use other types of resource questions. They can be geospatial, they can be questions, and that can help build your ranking pool up here. So you would have to answer those questions if they were not geospatial. If they're geospatial, the tool runs to it for you, and it will kick out the answer. And then there's some things like that are programmatic questions. These are normally things that Congress gives us. They want to spend more money on new and beginning farmers. They want, let's say there's a veterans program, they could give 5 extra points to veterans, something like that. But those are more each program has specific requirements that aren't resource-based, but have other things. So we do have that ability in here. And then the last is an efficiency. And efficiency looks at, how much does it normally cost to implement this practice on that site, and so what's the efficiency of the plan that we're kicking out on your site. Now, certain programs value that a lot, and other programs not so much. So what these 5 things can then be weighted, but for each program to determine, so we can meet what Congress's intent is. And so, and then, that can help then, so we have all of the programs now fit within one system, whereas before everything was on different paper copies or different systems here and there, and you couldn't do a holistic look out for what types of programs you could work. CART is for the first time lets us do that. Now, you might think about, okay, well, that's 5 different categories. How do those break down? Some of you have probably worked on your state technical committee or your local technical committee. So not thinking about your own operation, but thinking about what's the things that we should prioritize in our county or in our state or in our watershed. So what CART does is it lets our folks work with you through these technical and local committees to gather input and capture what are the priorities. And we have a lot of flexibility built in CART to do that. You can do that by geospatial. Like I said, you can have watersheds. You can break down a ranking pool into various categories to make sure you're looking at like all of the cattle operations against all of the crop operations, and maybe they don't score similarly, so you'd want to rank them separately. So you can weight that appropriately. You can do weighting for those 5 aspects. If you think efficiency is really important, you can make that 50% of the score. Or if you think vulnerability is really important, you can raise that within the guidelines that Congress gives us. You can look at certain land uses. You might want to just look at crops. You might want to just look at pasture within a certain program. We can weight different resource concerns. You might not be interested in wildlife in that one, and you're really focused on water quality in this one priority watershed. You can do that within the system as long as the program allows you to do that. You can also pick your conservation practices. You can leave the full gambit of practices that lets our planners have more flexibility to address the problem, or you can narrow that down. So if this is just a cover crop program, you could have just a cover crop program if you wanted to. So same thing with this priority and resource questions. The key thing is we try to answer a lot of them geospatially if we can. Big advantage to that is if it makes it so that we don't have a personal error. So if somebody failed to check something appropriately, it doesn't make yours different than someone else's. Everyone's will be evaluated with the same criteria. And so that's just something to think about if you're on one of those committees and working on helping us customize. The other thing is we have additional programs within NRCS, like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, that allows partner organizations to basically help us by prioritizing spending pots of money to address certain projects and problems around the nation. And in those cases, we would work with them to go through and set up these criteria. So a lot of combinations there. It's sometimes almost overwhelming. It's kind of like walking into the grocery store and having 100 different choices of toothpaste when I just really want my Crest. But we give you a lot of flexibility out there at that planning level with the local committees. So hopefully advantages then for CART. We can do program neutral planning, which is we're trying to get down to what is needed to help fix the problem out on your farm. And then that information helps us streamline that assessment and ranking process. So then we use that local program flexibility that I just went over to build that prioritization and to really plan for that and then plan for those outcomes. Because now we've got a point system behind the scenes that our goal is to tie that to conservation outcomes at the end. And so now we can look for, well, these type of operations, we would expect to see more erosion improvement, more water quality improvement, more sage grouse, or whatever that thing may be. We also have a lot more information now with the geospatial about what's going on the site at our fingertips, which helps us not only do a better job of planning, but also helps with that environmental assessment that we have to complete. We'll avoid their duplication, which, this year we rolled it out. We have a lot of folks that they're seeing this for the first time. It was during COVID. We also ended up having a lot more funding available, so we had more applications than we do in a normal year. And CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, had a general sign-up, which they haven't had in years, which added to our workload as well. So I won't say this is our first year we didn't run into some hiccups, just like I learned about baling hay. But our ultimate goal is to help make this more streamlined and avoid the duplication, make it so our staff can spend more time talking to you out in your operation. The other part is it gives us now a platform that we can work with our technical service providers, or our TSPs that are out there. And so if you're working with a CCA on your farm and he's already got this information captured, at your maintaining your privacy, but if you want to just share that and then it can come into our system and already pre-answer a lot of these questions, and that's just going to make both of our jobs easier and help you become be timely to make sure you get your application in for when we have those funding opportunities. So that's one of the things that we're working on, is making that type of integration available. I know a lot of farmers are now starting to save their data either with their CCAs or other providers, or in their own softwares that are out there, and there's a number of the different cloud-based ag data software. So if we can make these more compatible, not only can you send data to us, but you can take data out and then use that into your own software that you may be using to manage your operations. And it can help you get better transparency on what you're applying for and what those opportunities are. So CART by the numbers, as I said, we just implemented this in January. It's sort of like your cell phone in that you get an update every couple of months. so we are building it and making it more user-friendly as we go along. But we've had over 5,000 users, and I guess it's really a misnomer there. It says NRCS users, but we have a lot of conservation partners with conservation districts and state employees that are all included in that 5,000. So I need to change that. We've looked at over 11 million resource concerns that we've assessed through the system, which really gets down to that 111,000 different plans. And so that's the different assessments that we've done out there. It looks at 79 million acres, which, is making a dent. But, that's very similar to what NRCS does in a year's time. We normally do about 100,000 plans a year. So you can see it was a heavier year. This is before the end of the year. We know we have more CRP plans that are currently in the works. So you can see that, our staff have really worked hard to, make a new system work this first year. And, we've, had success at that, with, of course, our new hiccups while we're all working from home. Future opportunities that we're looking at, like we talked about a little earlier, any type of new resource services, if there's a better way for us to do the assessments, we built a framework that we can plug and play and put that in. So we're looking at those opportunities. And can we have more regional specificity or regional-based tools? Yes, we can. So those are the things that we want to look at in the future. How do we use that? Practice variability I briefly covered earlier when we had the CPPE discussion, but there is, our practices can be implemented in some fairly broad ways. And so we want to add that ability to really do a better job of looking at their environmental effects. Import-export ability I mentioned, detailed assessments. There are certain sites that need more information. And sage grouse was one of those I mentioned earlier, but we could have a sage grouse additional questions to talk specific about that, which can help people gain access to the national programs that are out there. Outcomes reporting, part of that's for Congress. They ask us about what we're achieving at a national level, but part of that's for you at the local level is that we want to be able to give you outcomes about your operation, whether that's soil erosion, soil saved, whether that's water quality improved, not only for your own personal benefit, but also because we know that there are becoming more and more demands up your supply chains for information about the operation. Now, we're not going to share that directly. We take privacy very seriously at USDA, but if you want to get the outputs of that and share that, we would certainly want to give you that additional value that we can provide to you. TSP access, I already mentioned, but bringing them into the system so we can be working together to provide you service is one of our high goals. Economics for conservation, I'm always asked, when can we put more economics in so you can see the value of the practices that you have? So we are working on that. It's getting the environmental effects across the entire nation everywhere is a big challenge. Now throwing in economics into that with all of the various opportunities out there takes it to a new level, but we are starting to make some progress in that area. We also know that area-wide planning tools are out there. If you're, again, working with the district or working with a state agency, wanting to come up with area solutions, what we want to do is make sure that we've got a system that can scale up or down to help folks understand and utilize that information. And then the last one there, but not the least for sure, is, like I mentioned before, we want to make as much information available to you as possible. And at some point, we'd like to give you the opportunity to have access to the tool, again, maintaining your privacy, but that if you want to experiment with some different options in the tool itself, go ahead and do that so you can see what kind of outcomes we would expect. So with that, that's sort of my brief CART overview. I think next time Eric's going to go into a much deeper dive for what's going to look like actually in the tool, which will give you some insight as to things that the tool takes into account when doing its assessments. But that's what I've got for today, and would give it back to Jeff for any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Aaron. We've got a lot of questions rolling in here. Here's maybe somebody that is pretty new. So is the CART program something that is automatically implemented when seeking NRCS conservation program assistance? Or is the CART system something separate?
So this year, we implemented CART for 95% of the programs that NRCS offers. There's a couple of, one of the CSP ones and one of the CRP ones that didn't get used this year, but every other program that you'd want to enter into within NRCS, you'll automatically go through the CART system. So in next year, we'd expect all the programs will automatically go through the CART system.
It says you state that ranking pool will be customized by the appropriate NRCS program manager after incorporating local input from the state technical committee. Have all state technical committees been asked about input? This person says, I sit on the NRCS state technical committee and I have not been asked for my input.
So this last year, certainly we rolled the system out. We had told states that they, or advised states that they were supposed to try to get input with their state technical committees. It would have happened in the December, January timeframe of last year. They should be working with you now as we come up to the new year, so it depends on your schedule when you're meeting with them. We have not set up the next year's ranking pools yet. So for next year, they should be working with you, but it may or may not have occurred yet, depending on sort of your state schedule. But certainly if you've not gotten any contact about it or they've not talked about it at all, I won't ask you to name names on the call, but certainly feel free to email me and I can dig into that a little more fully.
Does CART include soil and water district best management practices and funding?
So that's a great question. With this first year, we've just focused on the NRCS program. What we've had, though, as I mentioned, the framework is there for us to be able to add district and state and partnership, even whatever that partnership might be, other conservation organizations, funding opportunities into the system. So that's our goal, is that we want to start adding those. And if, like I said, our ranking system is pretty flexible and configurable. So we are pretty confident we probably can duplicate your ranking process. And so we want to try to get, if we can make sure that's in there and that it automatically comes up for farmers as an opportunity, we'd like to do that. Again, we're just learning this first year and building it out, but this next year we want to start working on some of those. So I would talk to your local state about, is that an opportunity? And if they look questionable at you, tell them Aaron sent you, and they will give me a call, I'm sure. But that is our long-range goal, is to try to get those other opportunities into the system so that we can provide the best customer service to the farmers out there.
Are we able to use CART? This is a specific of CART for a property we're in the process of obtaining. We're working with the Farm Service Agency on a land purchase. Can we see what programs might be available for that property?
So CART can help you in the broad sense once you looked at what your resource concerns are. Program eligibility has a lot of variable factors, so it's sort of hard to just look at a general what programs are eligible. But once you talk to your local district conservationists about what kind of improvements you're looking at doing, they can quickly use CART to narrow down what programs might be feasible.
When a farmer or a rancher is assessed and ranked by CART, do they receive something like a CART report, and that provides details? And these graphs you're showing, for instance, for the resources of concern addressed and how close or far the producer is from meeting. So in other words, do they get a kind of like a package that shows them where they're at and what they could or could not do? Is that kind of like, is there an output kind of document, I guess is what they're suggesting?
Yep. Yes, there is an output document. We, again, it's our first year that we're rolling it out. We've gotten a lot of feedback how to make that better. And so yes, you should definitely ask to see your CART information. And certainly as you give us feedback on what parts you find useful and which parts are harder to understand, please give us feedback on that, and we're making improvements to that all the time. But yes, you should be able to get that information. Again, this is your information on your operation, and you should be able to look at your NRCS file on your site. And one of the things that we are working with is, hopefully you're familiar with the farmers.gov site, which is how you can electronically access your records. Not all of the records now are automatically put onto there, but it is an opportunity to look at some of your records, and we're working on adding more records to that every day so that you can look at your records from the online site there and be able to access them.
Maybe this is a hard question to answer, but it is from a farmer. So it says, as a farmer, how would I be able to assess if the NRCS staff person who visits is considering my operation for all the opportunities which I could consider?
So we actually thought about that and specifically built into CART. What it does is it prints has a screen that shows all the opportunities that CART has. Now, CART doesn't look at, doesn't understand everything about you as an individual and what you may or may not be interested in, but it does come up with all of the matches that it finds. And then the planner actually is required to go in and mark those as either they want to be ranked in them, or that they've talked to you about them and you've declined that opportunity, or you're not eligible for some other reason. So you could request that report if you were concerned that you weren't being considered for all of them, and get a printout to see what things they put you forward to and which ones that they marked that you weren't eligible for.
Thanks. Here's one. There's actually a couple of them that are somewhat similar. I'll try to glom them together here. Is there any plan to allow landowners access to a portion of the CART tool on their own, or could a soil and water conservation district access it? One thing, could there be like a farmer-friendly rancher version of CART to develop so the farmer or rancher could do a kind of a self-assessment and approximate ranking in the comfort of their home, so as to explore the potential of accessing federal resources?
Yes, that is my goal. And sort of that last bullet item there, that would be the idea, is that we can get these tools, make them available for you. One of the things we're also doing with the different assessment methods is trying to make them as web services that other tools that are out there can call them as well, so they can get the same answer. We recognize, sometimes the government IT process works a little slower than some of the private ones. So if you're working with an organization that has a software program that you like to use, we're trying to make it available that they can pull and get the same answers that we're getting, so they could build their own page for you that shows what CART's showing within their site. But the ultimate goal is for us you to be able to go into that farmers.gov site, be able to pull this information up, be able to make some manipulations of it, and see what happens, and kind of look at what are the opportunities.
I think that's it for today, and then let's Jason, I'm going to get control back, and we can give you a few updates on what's next.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and I appreciate everybody that's been listening today.
Yeah, and there's some more questions that will funnel to you if I can't answer them myself. So thanks for everyone and for your many questions. And again, I couldn't get to all of them, but I will respond to each and every one of the questions that were put in the question box. The next one is coming up next week already, a week from today. Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool, the process. And this is Erica from the Natural Resources Specialist with NRCS, and Aaron will be both doing this. And it will kind of give basically how it would work for a person that was applying for the Conservation Stewardship Program. So that give you more kind of in-depth. And then a couple weeks after, we're going to do something that might be also interesting if you're interested in how conservation works and things. We call it the deep dive, and looking at the science behind CART and the methodology for ranking tool uses to rank different applications across multiple ranking pools for consideration. So there's that's the deep dive, and we welcome all of you to join us again, and I'm sure we can answer as many questions as we can, and we'll all be experts on CART by the end of all those 3 webinars. So thanks for attending, and thanks for everyone today, and hope to see many of you next week. And have a good day.